But right now we are joined by Tom Loeffler of K2 Promotions. He is the managing director. They have a big bout coming on here March 18th, Madison Square Garden. Gennady Golovkin, all we know him as Triple G, versus Daniel Jacobs, middleweight championship on the line. Tom, we appreciate you taking up the time.
No, it's great to be on the show. Always like talking about the boxing, and especially when we have a show like next week. It's Triple G versus Danny Jacobs, the two best middleweights in the world, fighting at Madison Square Garden. It doesn't get better than that.
Tom, from your perspective, this is Adam. From your perspective, how rewarding was it, or what was the feeling finally landing a top heavyweight to fight Golovkin? Because I know it's been years that your team has been calling out the top guys in the division. There's been a who's who of fighters who haven't signed on the dotted line for one reason or the other. What's the feeling of finally getting somebody to step up to fight your fighter?
Well, I'll tell you, this fight with Danny Jacobs was actually mandated by the WBA, but you're right, Adam. It really it's been a challenge over the years to get one of the top names to agree to fight Gennady. It was a big step getting David Lemieux, who was another champion, in a unification fight. That was the first pay-per-view at Madison Square Garden just about a year and a half ago. And this will be the next time Gennady's coming back to the Garden. But this time it just has a much bigger feel to it. Danny Jacobs has had a lot of exposure. He's been on premium cable and network television. They just did a great feature on him at 60 Minute Sports last night on Showtime. And the 24/7 that was done on the guys last Saturday, that was one of the highest rated 24/7s in recent years. So it really is really getting a lot of buzz on the fight, and this just feels like not only Gennady's biggest fight, but clearly his most dangerous opponent.
Let me, if I could, let's go back 5 years. Golovkin is this knockout artist in Europe, fighting mostly out of Germany. He's a big hit amongst many of the hardcore internet fans, of which I was one in the U.S. You were somehow able to bring him or convince HBO to take a Kazakh middleweight based out of Germany to somehow have a featured spot in a Labor Day weekend in New York on HBO. Can you talk a little bit about that process, and how did you determine that's the route that you wanted to go in? Set up how that transition occurred.
Yeah, that was actually up in Turning Stone, New York, at the casino up there. It wasn't an easy process for sure. I'll tell you how the process went. I set up meetings with both HBO and Showtime in January of that year. We had just signed Gennady at the end of December. I was very excited by it. I had mentioned to Sal Federico at Madison Square Garden that we had the undefeated middleweight champion of the world at that time, and they were excited, but it was hard. That was really before the fighters from the Eastern Bloc countries, or the former Soviet countries, really became popular over here. So, when I made the pitch and I said, Gennady Golovkin, silver medalist from the Olympics, undefeated, WBA middleweight champion. He'll fight anyone. We're not asking for a lot of money. He just wants a television exposure, and it really took a long time to actually make that meeting come to fruition with an HBO date. What happened was we actually didn't even get the date. What happened was it went to that date, if you remember correctly, it was Daniel Geale versus Dmitry Pirog.
Right, and that was supposed to be Golovkin Pirog. Right.
Yeah, it was coincidentally Dmitry Pirog was the only person to have beaten Danny Jacobs, and that was 12 fights ago, where Danny since then has had 12 wins with 12 knockouts. But that was the original pairing, was Daniel Geale against Pirog, and then Geale pulled out of that fight to fight Felix Sturm in Germany. He was getting more money to go to Germany to fight Sturm, and so that was the only way we got Gennady on, was because then nobody wanted to fight Pirog. and Gennady had agreed to fight Pirog and unify, the WBA title. I think Pirog had the WBO title at the time, and then unfortunately Pirog got injured and he pulled out with a back injury, and luckily we got HBO to keep Gennady on that slot since he made the commitment. And then Artie Pelulu got Proxa, the European champion, to fight Gennady, and it was a very hard process getting him on. But once his skills were exposed to the HBO viewers and really the U.S. Boxing fans, everyone wanted to see him back on HBO, and that's how we got started.
Following up along the same lines, what was it about Gennady that you think? What did you think about him, or what was the specific characteristic or traits that he had that you think that he would be successful cracking the American boxing market?
I thought Gennady would be successful anywhere he fought. He originally could have taken a completely different course. If Gil hadn't have pulled out of that fight, he was the mandatory for Felix Sturm over in Germany for about 2 years, and Sturm had filed, every exception and extension you can imagine with the WBA not to have to face Golovkin as his mandatory, and the only way he got that last extension was because Gil was a champion, and he made the argument that it was a unification fight, so he got one more extension, and otherwise if he had gotten the Sturm fight in Germany, he could be fighting over there on network TV, but it's been his dream to fight here in the States. A lot of people don't realize he was training with Abel Sanchez before I started working with him, so he had made the commitment to train over here in the States. At that time, all the top middleweights were fighting over here in the States besides Sturm, but Sergio Martinez, who was the best middleweight at that time, was fighting here. Peter Quillen was here. Chavez Jr. was fighting over here. So, he made the commitment to fight in America, and it's really paid off because of all the marketing that we've done on our side, the promotional side, but also, you need a commitment from the fighter. A lot of fighters just want to train for the fight, not do interviews, and then go fight and want to win the fight. But a lot of them don't realize it's a two-pronged approach where you got to look great in the ring, but you also have to promote the fight. If no one sees the fight, if no one buys tickets, it's counterproductive. So Gennady really made the extra efforts to not only train for the fight and look spectacular. If you didn't have 23 knockouts in a row, it would make my job a lot harder as far as trying to market him. But at the same time, it might have made it easier to get someone to fight him because it just seems like, at that time, nobody wanted to be subjected to his power.
How has the last 2 years affected Golovkin in the terms of people running the other direction from him? Has he been able to stay upbeat throughout this process? Has he been frustrated? Obviously, he still trains hard and wants to be the best in the sport. But can you shed light on how has he been able to handle the disappointment sometimes of not getting the top opponents in the ring?
Well, I'll tell you, the good thing was that HBO made the commitment to showing Gennady, regardless of who he fought. They realized, look, you can't force guys to get in the ring. We couldn't get, Sergio chose to fight Miguel Cotto instead of fighting Gennady. We had tried to make fights with other high-profile names, and we couldn't get them to agree to fight him in the ring. So the formula was a winning formula. We'll just continue to show Triple G, regardless of who he fights, and the more active that he is, and the more exposure he gets, the bigger he became. And now, where he is selling out arenas, where he is generating revenue on television, not only here in the U.S. on HBO, or in this particular case against Danny Jacobs on pay-per-view, but also internationally. His fights are shown in over 100 countries worldwide. He's a big international star. When we went to a boxing convention last year in China, when we were at the convention, the Chinese boxing fans, they all knew who he was and were looking for his autograph and his photograph. And it's nice to see the reception that he gets on the international side, not only here in America. And you saw when he went to the UK for the first time, he fought Kell Brook, who was undefeated, and arguably Kell Brook had a nice following in the UK. But the UK fans, they just wanted to see the legend of Triple G. He's knocking everybody out, and they wanted to see him live, and that was a great event as well. Just selling out the arena the way he did in London.
Sure.
Now, Tom, along those same lines, if you don't mind me asking, how has superstardom actually? Have you seen it change Triple G and you over the last year or so? Is he still the same guy that you brought over here to American, to HBO fans here years ago, or are you seeing him maybe anyway kind of changing or going Hollywood on us and on the boxing fans?
I tell you one thing, in a glimpse that the 24/7 shows is, he's still the same guy. He's still the same humble, respectful guy that is a great ambassador for the sport of boxing, and very respectful of his opponents, very respectful of the sport itself. He takes it very seriously. He trains very hard. He's always in shape. He never comes in overweight. In fact, he always comes in a pound under 160. He never has any issues making the weight. So, he's the same guy, even though his star has risen. I mean, we need a little more security for him than we did before when he was just kind of like, flying by himself on the planes. Like Abel said, he flew from Germany over here to start his training camp the very first time he started working with them, but he's the same guy. He drives one car. He probably makes more money than the majority of the boxers in the sport, but he doesn't have like a 10-car garage or a 10-bedroom house. It's just he's just a really humble guy. He comes from very humble background in Kazakhstan, blue collar family. His father was working in the coal mine, kind of a rough neighborhood where he grew up. It was known in the Soviet Union as that's similar to where Danny grew up in Brooklyn. It's just it was a rough neighborhood, and so they have a lot of similarities intertwined. And Danny is one of the biggest punchers in the sport of boxing. Also, he's got over 90%. People talk about Gennady's knockout power. I mean, Danny has over 90% knockout ratio himself. And whenever you can take out Peter Quillen, who was an undefeated former world champion in the first round, I mean that's a huge exclamation mark for Danny's punching power, and he's physically bigger than Triple G. So I think people are really thinking, if someone's going to beat Gennady, Danny Jacobs has the best chance, and that's what's really drawing the attention to this matchup.
I know Adam had a couple of questions in regards to the undercard as well.
Well, I want to get to the undercard because there are a couple of fighters I don't want to talk to, but I have to ask this one question since you're here. I know there's not going to be a major announcement, but I keep hearing 90%, 90%, 90% from Golden Boy. I'm not asking you to make an announcement. I'm sure you won't. But if Golovkin should win and Canelo should win his fight, is this 90% just the smokescreen, or are there still active talks, negotiations, discussions for that potential mega fight later in the year?
I mean, my gut feeling is it's going to happen. Every conversation I've had with Eric Gomez at Golden Boy, it's always been positive. There's certainly nothing finalized or nothing agreed to. I was asked recently on an interview, how I would rate the chances, from 1 to 10, and I had said 9.5. But at the same time, the caveat is, if Gennady loses March 18th or if Canelo loses May 6th, then the chances are 0 that fight happens this year. So there's two big ifs there. Nothing is nobody's overlooking, certainly no one from our side is overlooking Danny Jacobs. We realize that it's the toughest fight for Gennady, but at the same time, because we've had such a challenge in the past getting people to agree to fight Gennady, it's been ongoing discussions. Fans are clamoring for the Canelo fight, and the media wants to see that fight. And Golden Boy said that we would do it not last year, but this year coming up in September. So we'll do everything we can in our power to try to make that fight. And it's always been a dream as well for Gennady to unify the middleweight division. So that fight is out there as well. If the Canelo fight doesn't happen, looking at unifying with Billy Joe Saunders.
Sure.
Gilberto Ramirez is fighting now April 22nd here in Los Angeles. I mean, Bob Arum has always reached out and said, that would be a great fight at 168 pounds. So the good thing is if he wins in March 18th, I think it's going to open up a lot of doors for one of those really high-profile fights if he's successful against Danny Jacobs.
Great. One of your other fighters, Roman Gonzalez has what I think is a difficult fight on the undercard against Swiskatet Sor Rungvisai as a Thai fighter, and he had a very difficult and competitive match with Carlos Cuadras, who's also on the undercard. Are you concerned about this match, from a matchmaking perspective and from what's next for Roman Gonzalez?
Well, it's not like Chocolatito chose Rungvisai to fight in New York. It was mandated by the WBC. Many people have told me that Rungvisai. By the way, I have to compliment you on your pronunciation, because a lot of people can't say his name correctly. It's a difficult name, but that Rungvisai is actually a more dangerous opponent than Cuadras was, and we saw the war that Chocolatito was in against Carlos Cuadras. It was the fourth weight division that he won a world title in, moving up in weight, and Rungvisai has 38 KOs and 41 wins. So, big puncher. He fought, like you said, he fought Cuadras in Mexico, and that's an exciting fight for the fans. Whenever we can combine Triple G and Chocolatito, it just seems to be a great 1-2 punch for the fans and for the media. And then, adding Carlos Cuadras on the undercard, he has kind of a cross-town rivalry against David Carmona, but they're both from Mexico City. Andy Lee is on the show. He's a favorite in New York City and in Madison Square Garden. He's actually fighting, coincidentally, one of Gennady's training partners, Keandre Leatherwood from Birmingham, Alabama. So that'll be a nice fight that's on the show. Ryan Martin is a rising star. He's training out of Cleveland, Ohio. He's 17-0, fighting a local guy from Port Chester, Pee Wee Cruz, from 17-1. So it's really we try to put on a very competitive, full show for the fans that'll be there or watching on TV, and I think they'll really get a treat on St. Patrick's Day weekend.
Personally, I'm very pleased that Cuadras is on the card, because I thought that match with Gonzalez was fantastic. And I always hate when a fighter comes on, gets a tough luck decision, and then is kind of forgotten in the American audience. So I'm very happy that you and HBO have decided to bring him back. And obviously he's mandated by the, I believe it's the WBC, should Roman win, for a rematch, which would be fantastic. So I'm very glad that both you and HBO decided to keep Cuadras in the American boxing public's consciousness. So thank you for that one. One other fighter I'd like to ask you about before you go, because he has an enormous fight coming up next month, which is the Vladimir Klitschko, the signature K2 fighter. Since your company has been in business, obviously K2, the Klitschko 2, the Klitschko brothers. He is fighting Anthony Joshua, a fantastic fight that's going to be in England. One aspect of the fight that is interesting to us in America is there's been a delay in terms of the announcement. And I know there's all sorts of things going on with the contracts between which network has which fighter. What can you tell us about where that's going to be broadcasted in the States?
Well, I'll tell you, when you talk about big fights, when you have 90,000 people in Wembley Stadium, and you have two, giant heavyweights, so both, in the 6'5", 6'6" range, both, around 245, 250 pounds, chiseled muscle, both Olympic gold medalists. There's a lot of similarities between Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko. The only difference is Vladimir is really the legend, having been a world champion for over 10 years and really the experienced veteran. Also very big punching power, a lot of knockouts with Vladimir. And then you have the young gun, undefeated, all knockouts, Anthony Joshua, extremely popular in the UK. It's a huge fight, and not only is it popular in the UK, but you see, exactly what you hit on is that HBO and Showtime, both want to televise that fight. They sense the interest internationally on that fight, and it's nice to actually have two networks vying for a fight rather than having to beg one network just to get the fight on TV. So I'm sure something will be worked out there between we're working with Eddie Hearn on that promotion, and I'm sure something will be worked out on the U.S. TV side. As soon as it is, then we'll make that announcement. But I figure, in the next couple of weeks we should have something that's set there. But that's really just the delay of making that announcement is just the fact that both networks are so interested, in the fight. Showtime has shown Anthony Joshua's fights.
Sure.
Vladimir is the history with HBO on broadcasting his fights, and so it's nice to actually see, because a lot of times the U.S. networks kind of brush the international fights, under the rug, or don't really highlight it or spotlight it. I mean, we just had a great fight with Tony Bellew and David Hay from the UK, and you really had to search to get that fight over here. But I think this will turn into be a great matchup, and this could be one of those classic fights where you could have a trilogy coming out of popularity with Vladimir and Anthony Joshua is tremendous in the heavyweight division.
Tom, what's your sense of how long Vlad wants to continue fighting?
That's a good question. Every time I see him train, I always just amazed. He'll be 41 here at the end of this month, and I've never really seen such a perfectly proportioned heavyweight that can move on his feet. We have to give a lot of respect to Emmanuel Stewart, who I think kind of transformed Vladimir's style. Got him moving on his feet. He was throwing the jab and the hook off of his jab, and just really kind of brought his style to a different level, and was very instrumental in Vladimir's dominant reign for so long. But I think it really depends on what happens in this fight, and then just physically how Vladimir feels. I never got the sense that he's going to be the guy that's sticking around boxing too long. As soon as he feels it's not good for him, then I'm sure he'll stop. But I think he definitely hasn't reached that point yet, and I've never seen him so motivated after the Tyson Fury loss. I just think it just wasn't reflective of what he's capable of, and that's what the boxing fans really appreciate. They understand if you have one off night, you can lose all your titles, you can lose your championship. Your fortunes can change overnight from being a champion to just being, a challenger. And in other sports and team sports, you can feel sick or sit out 1 week or lose a few games and still win the championship. And in boxing, you can't say, well, I have the sniffles, I'm not going to play today, or my ankle doesn't feel right. It's just so much riding on the date and on the competition. And you saw when Gennady fought Gabriel Rosado, he had the flu, and he could barely breathe on Thursday, and he actually went through with it. It was very dangerous, but came out victorious. But that's just a point. If you're not 100%, you can't really rely on somebody else to take your place, like in a team sport, and go play the game for you. You got to go in the ring, and you got to perform at your best every time you get in the ring.
Tom, my last question about Vlad. I know that there were fights that were canceled. He had a rematch with Tyson Fury, which never materialized. He wound up not fighting at all in 2016. Was he still close to boxing throughout the year? Or did he take some time off? What was his mindset, after the loss and especially the cancellation, where he wasn't training for a fight most of the year? Can you tell us about what 2016 was like for him, and how did he get to this point where he wanted to take another run and go for Joshua?
I know he was very frustrated. He was extremely motivated to get his titles back, to do the rematch with Tyson Fury. He was frustrated because it was scheduled twice with Fury, and he started his training camp, so he always stayed in shape. And Vladimir's the type of guy, just like Gennady, Vladimir's the type of guy who's always active. He's paddleboarding. He's always stays active, so you don't see him gaining 20-30 pounds when he's not fighting and having a belly or something like that. He's always in great shape. So but mentally, I know it was frustrating for him. He just wanted to get back in the ring. He wanted to get his titles back. When Tyson, wasn't able to defend the titles and got stripped of the titles, I think this is certainly the next best thing. Where if he can beat Anthony Joshua, all of a sudden he's back on the top of not only the heavyweight division but in the sport of boxing. As I mentioned before, the way your fortunes go, he was the most dominant heavyweight champion we've seen in such a long time, and then going from losing his titles to not fighting at all, 1 year, having to sit out, kind of waiting for somebody else, was very frustrating for him. And I know he's extremely motivated, and I think you'll see a successful result on April 29th.
Okay.
Well, Tom, we appreciate you taking out time breaking down not only what's going on here with Klitschko and his big fight here come April, but as well here March 18th, Madison Square Garden, HBO pay-per-view, Daniel Jacobs versus Gennady Golovkin, a.k.a. Triple G. There are still limited tickets available on Ticketmaster.com, so we always want to encourage the fans to definitely go. If you're in the New York area, go and see that fight live. This is going to be a hell of a fight. And as well, HBO pay-per-view where you can watch it in the comfort of your own home. So again, Tom, we appreciate you taking that time joining us here on Punch to Face Radio.
No, I appreciate that. It's always great to be on, and especially being with the guys that are knowledgeable in the sport, and it's just gonna be a fantastic weekend next weekend. Don't forget, Usyk is fighting also April 8th on HBO. It'll be a second fight on HBO. He's kind of the next rising star, I think, from the Eastern Bloc that you'll see also a gold medalist. But we're excited about.
I will be there for that one, Tom. I will be in National Harbor for that fight. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so. Fantastic. I mean, that's a tremendous show with Lomachenko on and Usyk and Dvorak. So, yeah, that's a tremendous show as well. So, really appreciate your support on the sport and particularly with the fight coming up next week, and always look forward to coming back on.
Thanks. Best of luck, Tom.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.